Hello everyone, my name is Eileen Berkowitz and I'm the Marketing Manager and Webinar Coordinator here at Data Blueprint. We'd like to thank all of you for joining today's webinar on the business value of data and return on investment. We'll get started in just a few moments after I introduce your speaker, and I'd also like to go over some housekeeping items so you have a better idea of what to expect from today's session.
That's a good way to start. Oops.
Yeah, sorry about that. Due to the large number of attendees, we have everyone on mute, but we'll be collecting questions via the public chat at the bottom right corner of your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as time allows at the end of the session. The control panel on your right automatically minimizes itself to give you more room to view. But if you prefer to keep it open the entire time, just click View in the top menu and uncheck Auto Hide the control panel. Now the top two of our most commonly asked questions are, will I get copies of the slides and is it recorded? And the answers are yes. Standard registrations will receive a copy of today's slides, and also we will send you a link of the recording, so you'll get that sometime tomorrow afternoon. Now, let me switch screens to our presenter and also introduce Peter to you. Dr. Peter Aiken is an internationally recognized thought leader in the data management field. Many of you already know him and have seen him at conferences nationally and worldwide. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions. He's the founding director of Data Blueprint, associate professor of information systems at Virginia Commonwealth University, and president of DAMA International. Peter has held a variety of positions, two of them at the Department of Defense and Software Engineering Institute. By now, he has written 7 books and dozens of articles. He's experienced with more than 500 data management practices in 200 countries and consistently named as one of the top 10 data management experts in the world. He's highly desired at conferences and workshops and always traveling to numerous speaking engagements and projects. We've recently had some busy weeks closing out the last quarter of this year. And during our last webcast, Peter actually came to us live from London, England, where he attended and presented at the Data Management and Information Quality Conferences. So, Peter, which exotic location did you choose for today's session?
Well, actually, we're back in the middle of the country, Eileen, but I'm just back from Japan, so a little bit going around your elbow to reach your knee, or one of those type of metaphors. Anyway, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And our topic is the last one of our 12-part series here, where we wanted to give you all, the data managers of the world, some tools, some ideas, some ways of thinking about how to do something that we call monetizing, but it's really all about communicating with executives in this context to deliver the business value that comes from data management, because we're always getting this question. People say, well, I understand it's important, but how do I convince other people that it's important? So as always, the seminar is brought to you by Data Blueprint, which is a company that I co-own with the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Business. We are the largest university in the state of Virginia, and we're very proud to be able to bring you these types of sessions. The general focus here, then, is that there's a real unfortunate sense that outside of the local DAMA community, data management is performed relatively poorly. There's an ineffectiveness of all of these data management initiatives that we have. And it turns out that they also contribute to the root cause of IT systems failures. So what we're going to do today is talk about some very specific examples of success stories and some ways in which groups that we've worked with have taken and monetized these examples. The importance of this is that if you get on an elevator with an executive and they look over at you and say, oh, hi, I'll pick on Thelma because she's here in the room today, right? Hi, Thelma, you're working for me. What do you do? And the elevator starts to go down. You've got to be able to articulate some value there, or the executive's going to remember Thelma couldn't answer the question. And that's not the impression you want the executive to walk away with. Instead, we want Thelma to say, I provide money to you, or I help you do this, or I help you return on investment, whatever it is, whatever your elevator speech is for your group, because that way it'll work. Now, I have to tell you, the location we're at here is only 2 stories high, so it's a very, very short elevator ride. So tell me, you would have some trouble with that particular one under any circumstances here. Let's dive into it. Again, our goal here is to help you all prepare for the CDMP. Now, the CDMP is a designation that DAMA International, the organization that I'm the president of, sponsors trying to get people into this profession. We want people to become data managers, and we want them to understand more about what we do. So we've published a body of knowledge here. What we did is we started out on our journey by data governance, and we'll flip around to that in January. We'll go back to data governance and work our way around the wheel. The ideal situation is that if you all take these webinars here, you would be able to sit for the CDMP. And I can tell you, at least at the moment, there are 2 CDMPs in the state of Arkansas, and both of them work right here on the floor with me. In fact, the DAMA Northwest Arkansas chapter is going to have a celebration for them, we hope, sometime in the spring to recognize the first 2 in the state. Again, data management, as we know, is not strictly a technical discipline, so we've made sure that we put in here as well the other non-technical social aspects of what we do in here. And Eileen, great slide that you put together on this one here. The Certified Data Management Professional is a joint venture between the DAMA and the ICCP, which is the International Certification for Computing Professionals. They do a terrific job of running these tests. There are 17 specific knowledge areas. There's 3 exams. There's a lot more information out there. We're not going to dive into it now. Instead, what I'm going to do is give you my very short overview of what I mean by data management. And that's, of course, a very confusing slide, and I don't expect anybody to actually look at it. This is one of the things we do for executives, is to simplify it. So the first function in data management is to manage the data coherently. The input to that box on the previous slide is organizational strategy. What is the organizational strategy? And then how can we, as a group, take and marshal as many of the data assets that we have in the organization as possible so that we can start to sing off the same sheet of paper. One of the other fellows that works upstairs is in the choir here, and he said the worst thing to hear is everybody rehearsing, but the best thing to hear is to hear everybody performing. So we want to do the same thing with data management. We want to make sure that everybody is in fact performing correctly, singing off the same sheet of paper, because it's the only way you can obtain the proper leverage that you need to have in order to do data management. The second data management function is to share data across organizational boundaries. If we don't, then we have data that doesn't move, which is not kind of useful at all. Data may flow from program to program. It may flow from one part of the organization to another part of the organization, or it may flow between our organization and our partner organizations. Either way, there's no point in spending any more time than we should on that. We want to make that as efficient and as effective as possible. Third function is data stewardship. Until somebody is personally responsible for the data, everybody's responsible for it, which means nothing really happens. So this is about putting names on pieces of paper, on job descriptions. It says part of your raise next year will be determined by, and then we fill in the blank from there. Data development, which is the process of engineering data delivery systems. And if you remember our topic back that we did, I think it was around August or so, we also discovered that most colleges and universities teach only how to build new databases as their college and university courses in data management. We know that's all wrong. In fact, it's probably the last skill we should be teaching people how to do, because if the only tool you know how to use is a hammer, every problem tends to take on the characteristics of a nail. Finally, the fifth data management function is to maintain data availability, and that is business continuity, operations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we mean by data management functions in here. Now we're going to talk a little bit about data management investments. And the real key for this is that only one in organizational IT projects comes out unchallenged. Virtually all have problems in one form or another. You can see a couple of slides here of just large numbers of statistics where people have had big, big problems. Now, excuse me, as Eileen mentioned, she and I both are closely affiliated with Virginia Commonwealth University, and one of the things we do there is research. And one of the more interesting research papers, and if anybody would like a copy of this, please send me an email or send Eileen an email, and we'll be glad to get you a copy of this. Because we did have a very fortunate opportunity to ask data managers the same questions 25 years apart. And one of the questions we asked them was, is your data management initiative successful, partially successful, don't know, too soon to tell, unsuccessful, or doesn't exist? So the towers, the bars that you're seeing here in blue are the answers that they gave to us in 1981. The green bars are the answers they gave to us more recently in 2007. And you can see that's been quite some time. We have to go back and ask some more questions about this. But the number of successful implementations has fallen quite precipitously, and the number of partial successfuls has increased. Now, we know the numbers, we don't know what's behind the numbers. Now, I'll have to take that one on as my job. That's what my doctoral and master's students are doing at the university, is studying and digging deeper into these topics. But at the same time, it is sort of disturbing that people think this. Now, a very simple explanation for this could be that we thought data management was a very small, narrow thing in the past, which had to do with databases. And now we know that data management is much larger as a topic, encompassing non-tabular data and things such as SharePoint and that sort of technology that wasn't in there before. So that may explain part of this, but we just don't know. And when you have something that you don't know, we need to go off and do some more research on it. But the one thing that does concern me on this chart, if you look at the unsuccessful, we have a very precipitous rise in the unsuccessfuls that have happened since then. Now, what that means is that we've got some things that are going on. As I mentioned before, we started out thinking that database design and operation, the thing in the upper left-hand corner of this slide, was the sole domain of data management. We've seen it expand since then now to include data requirements analysis, data modeling topics, that's in the brown there, and then go to the blue where in the 90s we started putting organization-wide or enterprise-wide in front of everything that we did. And finally, since 2000, we've actually come up with a lot more things. These are the green, where we've introduced the topics of data governance, and you see some topics like MDM and mashups and things like that that are coming online. Actually, we have a new definition of ROI, too. Most people think that stands for return on investment. We use the term ROI to stand for risk of incarceration. There are, in fact, some people that are going to have some trouble in that area in the future, particularly if you're working with HIPAA data. One of the penalties is, in fact, jail time. Here's another piece of research that we pulled together from that same survey. Again, a little bit of a confusing chart, so I'll spend a quick minute explaining it here. The green that you see there were the questions that we asked in 2007, the brown in 1981. And we asked the question, which came first, the data management group or the database management system? Ideally, if you have everything going the way you would like it to, the database management group would form, and they would look over the organization, and then they would select the technologies. But you can see, and that was, by the way, in 1981, 26% of the group were doing data management first and then selecting their tool. 68% of them were actually getting the tool first and then figuring out they might as well get somebody to drive it. That's gotten considerably worse since then. We're now down to less than 10% that buy the database, that put their data management group together first, and 75% of these groups are buying the database technology first. How do you know, if you don't know what your organization is doing, whether you've purchased the right tools or not for it? So it's a very big challenge on here. Here's another result, too, that we've just completely astounded with. We asked the groups, same groups here again, are you involved with, that's yellow, an initiative leader, that's green, or not involved with the various topics that you see down the side, data warehousing, XML, data quality, et cetera, et cetera. And the amount of red on this chart is highly disturbing. What this means is that we're looking here and seeing that many enterprise resource planning programs are done up, and you can see there's very, very tiny amounts of data management participation in these initiatives. How you can do something called master data management and not include the data management group is just beyond me, but it does happen. So we want you all to join DAMA and help learn ways of counteracting some of these qualities in here, because we are the group that really does know what's going on. Finally, another piece of just research that we've come up with along the way is that when we asked people who had done at least 4 migration projects, data migration projects in here, and then we went back and double-checked to see how good they were doing, the experienced people who had done this 4 times only misunderestimated the project by 10. So good people that know what they're doing really don't have measures and metrics on this. So when somebody comes to your organization and says, I can fix this problem and it'll cost you X, whatever it is, they're lying or deluded. I don't have any other way to put it. It's not a nice thing to say, but we don't have ways of measuring these things. So what that leads us to are some very strong conclusions. Again, Eileen mentioned I've had experience with more than 500 different organizations in here. You can see the breakdown there, but the real bad news is here. Of 100 organizations that are attempting to do this, 10% achieve a positive return on their investment. 30% achieve a return on investment, and 70% have very small or negligible returns on their investment at all of this. Now what that means is that people are not paying attention to the root cause of why these things are going wrong. If you're a gardener, you know that you can't just go around knocking off the tops of all the weeds because they come right back, and that's what seems to be happening here over and over. And the insidious cause is poor data management practices. Now, let's move into our topic here in a very detailed way. First of all, a quick story. When I was with the U.S. Department of Defense, we went to Detroit to look at things. And one of the things we discovered was that Detroit has a little bit different way of thinking about things in there. And we unfortunately were using Detroit as our example. That may not have been the best example to look at, but that's what we did. In Detroit, when they're attaching something to the engine of a car, and that could be considered certainly a component of integration, they consider it a success if they have attached the thing to the car as it goes down the assembly line without slowing the assembly line down. That's a very good measure of success, but it's not the best. Toyota goes one step further. They go down and look at the car and say, after they're done, not should everybody use the standard bolt, but if we use the standard bolt, what savings could we get? So the difference here is that in Detroit, they may have 3 things they attach to the engine with 3 different types of bolts, which means they need 3 different wrenches, which means they need 3 different bolt and wrench inventories to be at all their dealerships when they want to work on their cars. Toyota, by the time they put the product out, tries as much as they can to use the same bolts for all of the assemblies. It's a different measure of success, which means they only have 1 bolt inventory and 1 type of wrench. Now, again, the numbers on these charts are not 3 and 1. But you get the sense of what we're trying to talk about here. If we go back and put a little bit more time and effort into this, we will find the ability to simplify things. Again, a big focus of data management is standardization. But gosh, we don't want to go around and say everybody has to use all the same data. That doesn't make any sense. So the question is, where should we apply this? And what type of thinking should go into it? And can we get that same type of thinking to go into what we're doing in data management activities? Excuse me, the next couple of slides are some academic research that a couple of colleagues have put together. Excuse me. That also gives us some messages to speak to these levels. Again, if an executive gets in the elevator and starts to talk to us, if we talk to them about topics that might be near and dear to our heart, for example, normalization or XML or something like that, they're probably not going to understand the impact on their business that these things have. However, if I tell them that an academic study here shows that a 10% improvement in data usability increases the productivity via sales per employee, the reason that's important is because sales per employee is what the C-level executives of the world's top corporations use to compare each other. So if we're in a retail environment, we might take the top 5 retail companies and they would compare them on Wall Street. The Wall Street analysts use these figures to compare them. So now I've talked to this executive and I've said to this executive, I've got something that will help you be better perceived on Wall Street. If we increase the productivity of sales per employee, that will help your numbers on Wall Street, which ultimately translates into the stock price. And of course, that's what good managers are trying to do, is to improve the value of their stock price. A couple more similar examples here is a 10% improvement in data usability. So this gives us an improvement in sales per employee here. You can see retail is not quite so high on this chart, but boy, telecommunications, if you're in telecom, you better pay attention to that one. Here's one where we talk about return on equity. So again, this is the language that the C-levels speak. And if you speak to them in the language that they understand, you might even get an invitation into the boardroom to come talk to them about this. Finally, return on assets. Here again, insurance company leads the way. Insurance companies that are not paying attention to this data quality here is going to be a big missed opportunity for most of these organizations. Again, I hope that's clear from you. I put the reference for that down on the bottom there. It's in orange, so it's a little hard to see, but if you just Google it, it will pop right to the top on that. So now we move into our first sort of monetization story. Now, Eileen and I live in Virginia, and in Virginia we have something called the Virginia Department of Transportation, VDOT. It's called different things. Just about every state has their own particular one. What is it called here? Any idea? Department of Transportation here. ADOT? Who knows? Anyway, we had a lot of people spending a lot of time doing time and leave tracking. And the question came up, how many people are doing it, first of all? So VDOT is a 10,000 person organization, and we only tracked 300 employees on this. We actually could have done a lot more. It turned out the actual number was larger than this. But if 300 employees are spending 15 minutes doing time and leave tracking, what does that mean to the organization? Well, it turns out this chart became a little bit famous in VDOT, because if you look at the teal category there, that's Lynchburg District, there are 40 people in Lynchburg who are at a grade 5 who are spending 15 minutes doing time and leave tracking. But there's at least one who's a grade 13 who's doing time and leave tracking. It's an expensive resource to do a clerical function. So once I have the number of employees, the various districts that they are, and the various pay grades, I can take a chart like this, which is completely incomprehensible. But what I'm looking at there is seeing the average pay, the entry-level pay for people at various entry steps. So again, I'm taking that grade 13 at step 11, and can figure out what the price is for that particular resource. The point is I can put a value on that resource, which means I can put together another series of calculations that come along and allow me to say, for example, for this district, this was Lynchburg District, to do leave tracking, they were spending annually $21,000 a year, and to do time tracking, they were spending $137,000. And when I sum these, I come up with an astounding figure that the chart I'm showing you there represents $10 million in expenditures. Now that's an enormous amount of money. And that's something that we are able to come back and say to a business person, why are you spending this much money doing this function? Are there better ways that you can spend this money? And so clearly this is a data management function, and if somebody says to you, well, we don't have money to do this, you say, well, you don't have money to do that, but you do have money to spend keeping track of whether people show up for work or not? Gosh, that's sort of a hard to believe one. So again, a very nice set of calculations that they used internally to show that they had $9,600,000 annually, or $10 million rounded up holistically, to be able to use in this. Now, next example. We tend to talk about ERP, but really this has to do with any package software, so any package that you bring in. And unfortunately, most of the ERPs are somewhat problematic when we bring them in. If you look here, we see that 10% succeed on time within budget as planned, so that's 55% left over for overruns, and canceled outright 35%. Now that's a lot of cancellations. And when we look at the overruns, we break it out, we say that the average cost is 178% of the forecast cost. The average schedule is 230% of the schedule that we planned, and the functionality that is delivered is 41%. Think of yourself being hot, even though it's December right now, and you're wanting a soda or a cold drink out of a machine. It costs $1, but it says, no, I'm sorry, you need to put in $1.75. And then instead of giving it to you when you're hot and thirsty, it gives it to you 2 days later, which isn't going to help you at all. And what it gives you is 41% of the original model. So we wouldn't put up with this in a retail environment. There's no reason we should put it up in the ERP or packaged software environment. And yet again, these statistics are quite well known. So let's take a specific challenge here. I've got a company here that is taking their payroll system, and their payroll system here has 683 specific attributes that we're looking at on one side of this. So the payroll system has 683 individual data items that we're looking at. And on the personnel side of it, there are about 1,500 attributes on the personnel side. Now they're going to take both of these things together and merge them into a new packaged software that will allow us to go in and merge these two and get better integrated information that we haven't been able to get before. Now, one of the things that clearly has to occur in order to do this is we have to map the about 2,000 attributes that we have onto about 15,000 logical attributes, or about 7,000 physical attributes on there. Here's the challenge. When we look at this, I call this extreme data engineering, because when you look at these implementation projects, 9 times out of 10, you will see 2 person months allocated to this task. For some reason, it just seems to be the number that everybody puts there. Okay, well, that's 40 person days. So if I'm going to map 2,000 attributes correctly onto 15,000 attributes, that means I'm going to map 2,000 attributes divided by 40 person days. That gives me 50 attributes per person day divided by 8 hours gives me 6.25 attributes per hour. And if I go a little bit further on the source side, the target side, it's 15,000 divided by 40 person days is 375 attributes per person day. Divided by 8 hours gives me 46 attributes per hour. So you're telling me that the consultants that you've employed to do the conversion here can locate, identify, understand, map, transform, document, and QA at a rate of 1 attribute per minute. Well, that's crazy. There's no way it's going to happen, and this is why these projects fail, because people underestimate the cost of doing this time after time after time. It's amazing, and yet it still keeps happening. Now, let's take another example of this. In most ERPs, you have a series of also process-oriented changes that occur in this as well. And the process changes are nice. That's great, although most cases you see some examples kind of like the one I'm showing where we went from one screen where everything was nicely integrated to 23 separate screens. That means it's a lot less integrated than it was before, and it's going to be a problem for people to adjust to the new system. Well, in addition to that, management also didn't think the workforce could adjust to, in this case it was a PeopleSoft implementation. They were afraid that everybody was used to working with Social Security number, and PeopleSoft correctly uses something called Person ID. Now, Person ID is a proper way to do it. This manager in this case said, well, how big a change would it be to replace all the instances of Person ID with Social Security number? Now, they're laughing here because that's not a very good thing to do, but nevertheless, they got the answer. It was not a very big change. Well, is that an actionable statement? No, it's not. And yet, if you say that, people might say, well, okay, let's go ahead and try it and see what happens. So we reverse engineered the system under these circumstances. And again, lots and lots of things out there. There's actually, I think, Eileen, a paper on our website that shows how to reverse engineer the PeopleSoft functionality here. I won't go into it in this particular presentation, but I will show you a little bit about one of the process hierarchies that are out there. You can see it building on your screen in front of you. When you reverse engineer PeopleSoft and obtain the metadata from it, you end up with a series of home pages. Those belong to each module. Each module then has one or more business processes associated with it. Each business process has one or more components, and each component has one or more steps involved in the component. So I've now given you a little metadata map showing you what looks like the overall metadata structure for the process component side of this slide. And I'm going to show you now what it looks like when we reverse engineer the system. Administer base benefits, you can see there in pink, is the business process name. The next part down is administer benefits billing. That's the next business process name. The business process in pink, administer base benefits, has 4 components. First one in yellow is manage benefit enrollments for the U.S. The second one in orange is manage dependents benefits. The third one down in teal is manage leave accruals. And the fourth one down is report benefit participation. Each of those has individual steps, and you can see those in column E on that spreadsheet that is there. Now, that spreadsheet then shows you some factual information that I can compile into a meta model, and that's what I'm showing you here is the meta model for PeopleSoft. There are 39 processes, upper left-hand corner, with 180 components, and those 180 components have 822 individual step names. When I have this type of factual information about the system, I can then go back in and say to the manager that asked the question, how many panels need to be changed. That's the next line down there. You can see it connected with the purple line. How many fields need to be changed, how many records and all the rest of that sort of thing need to be changed. In other words, how big a change is it? And instead of not a very big change, I can say 1,400 panels, 1,500 tables, and 984 business process component steps need to be changed. 15 minutes per change at $200 an hour gives me $194,000. Now, the Commonwealth of Virginia, in this case, also requires you to incorporate those changes not just in this one, but for the next 5 changes that are coming up. Because as we know, the software vendors are going to be putting out new versions of the software, and those same changes have to be applied and then reapplied each time that you do that. So all of a sudden, we are up to $1 million change on a $5 million project, in which case it doesn't sound like it's a small change anymore, does it? It's now a big change, and it's now something we need to pay attention to. So with this example, I'm showing you that as you're trying to move in a packaged software environment, there's a couple of things that will likely get misunderestimated: the cost of implementing the changes from the data perspective and the cost of doing the data mapping. You can look like a heroic person in your organization by coming along the next time somebody says we're going to install this package and just do a little bit of math. How many people do you have? How many person months do you have? How many data elements do you need to change? And now you can come up with it. If you're going to do it at a rate of 1 per minute and you can actually make that, I want to hire you, because it's just impossible. We really like to think of it more in terms of an hour per attribute of analysis, because usually the systems are very poorly documented. Now, that's not a hard and fast statistic either, but it is something that is somewhat more useful for everybody to use. So they're estimating something in minutes for something that we actually know takes hours in order to do this. Okay, moving on to our next example here. It's a third one in the ERP environment, and this is sort of an MDM-ish kind of thing, or a text analytics, if you want to think of it that way. The organization in this case maintained 2 million NSNs, or SKUs, stock keepers numbers, stock keepers units. These are the unique identifiers for products that were there. And in the old system that they had, it was a matter of trying to figure out of clear text fields where this information was. So they had some absolutely excellent knowledge managers who would look at this and say an asterisk in column 12 means blah, blah, blah. They were, of course, moving this one to SAP. Now, I love to include this particular example because everybody understands a person year worth of work or a person week worth of work. This is the first time I got to a person century, and I thought that was a lot of fun. Let's see how it worked out. If you look at this chart, we're going to spend a little bit of time on this one. What you'll see is a series of 18 revisions or iterations on this. Now, the first iteration that we did, you can see there, revision 1, we didn't match very many things. They were 31% unmatched. If you work on across the ignorable items, it was 1.3% through 4%, not very much. And we didn't match a single NSN or stock keeper number. We sucked. Now, that wasn't a great way to start out, but we also explained to the customer that we were going to start this and practice it and get better. And if you look down to number 4 there, line number 4, you'll see that the unmatched had increased from 31% to 32%. Yeah, we're going in the wrong direction on that one. But again, expectations management was okay because the ignorable items had increased to 11.99%. Again, I don't want to go too fast, but hopefully you all can see that there. And the total number of matched in this case then, percentage matched, was 55%. So now, just having done 4 iterations of the parser, we were able to take the problem space of 55% matched and 12% ignorable, and I've solved 2/3 of the problem. Now, the next question comes up, when do you stop? How far do you go? And the answer to that is you go to the point of diminishing returns. Diminishing returns means that you are getting less out of it than you're putting into it. And we knew how much each iteration of the parser cost. In this case, it was 2 of my data blueprint software engineers' time for 1 week. So that's a very easy fixed cost, and I now know how I can predict what is going to come out of this. So you can see by iteration 14, I skipped some time in there, we now had dropped the unmatched items from 32% down to 9%. And the items, the ignorable items had increased to 22%, and the items matched, we're at 68%. So I've done a good thing there, and I know I can go just a little bit further. And in fact, it turned out that we wanted to go 4 more times before we decided we had gotten as good as we were going to get, which in this case meant that we had only 7.46 of the original 2 million NSNs unmatched. That we could ignore absolutely 22.62% of the data that was in the database because it was rubbish, and we had matched almost 70%, 69.92%. Now when I've got a number or series of numbers like that, I've got the ability to say to people, if you're going to do it manually, it's going to take longer, cost more, and be more error prone. If I'm doing it in an automated fashion, as we were here, we now still have to do that same process, the error-prone process, to the remaining 350,000 NSNs that are out there. But that's the 7.46%. But for the vast majority of the 2 million NSNs that we were doing here, we were able to handle them automatically. Now, what does that save us when I look at this? Well, we take the number of NSNs we have there, it's 2 million. And I've circled that number 5 minutes. We'll come back to that in just a minute. We take the total time. We add the number of work days in a year, the number of hours, and do some math again here. It's really, really complicated, you can see. And now I have at the next to the bottom line, the bottom line, $5.5 million that it would have cost us to do this manually. Believe me, we did not get paid $5.5 million for doing that parsing stuff that we were doing, the text analytics there. But more importantly here, 93 person years. And that was kind of fun. So there's my person century there. And actually that's not right because I've circled the number 5 up there. Does anybody believe that it only takes 5 minutes to clean? The answer, of course, is no. So we double that to 10, and now I've got 2 person centuries. Triple it to 15 minutes per entry, which is probably more realistic. And now I have 3 person centuries and $15 million. Well, these things start to add up very, very quickly, and again, become tangible very quickly when we can show these series of stories to people in and around these production environments, and they now know that the manual way was definitely not the right way to approach this particular problem. Okay, next example here is a matter of found objects, or in this case, not so found objects. So I'm showing you here a product that I'm not advertising this particular product. There are lots of them that are out there. In fact, you can rent these things. But this is a piece of technology that we talked about in our 10th series on this, which was the Data Management Technology series. This is a data profiling tool that allows us to go through and trace the origin and the where values come into something in a data stream. Now, the bottom line in this case was that we were doing businesses for one of the branches of the armed forces. And one of the things the armed forces are fighting 2 wars right at the moment. So we want to be a little careful and make sure they're doing very effective things. And it turned out that if you have a tank, you need to know whether that tank is a current tank or an obsolete tank. If it's an obsolete tank, you're not going to drive it. You're not going to fill it with oil. You're not going to train people how to use it. You're not going to store it in your storage facilities. You're not going to pick it up and move it around the globe. But you can only do that if the tank has been labeled as obsolete. Now, every time the military buys a tank, it generates approximately 3 million individual data values, and one and only one of those was the one that was used for obsolescence. We were able to help the military in this case find approximately $5 billion, that's with a B, of obsolete equipment that they were maintaining. And people say thank you when we do that, because after all, if we don't want to use it, why are we going to put oil on it? Why are we going to store it? Why are we going to do things with it that we shouldn't do? So again, here's something that is going to get the attention of not just the general officers that are in charge of the various branches of the military, but also congressional representatives and senators who will say, yes, absolutely, we want the military to have what they want, and we want them to be as effective and efficient as we can, and we want to give them systems that will allow them to determine which of their tanks are obsolete and which ones are not, and stop putting money into the ones that are not correct. So again, hopefully an example there for you that you can take away, see something similar in your environment. Here's an example, and actually I see some of my colleagues in Europe are online here as well. This is an example from British Telecom that Dave Evans told me I could use. It's a little bit of a interesting, clever type of a piece, and I'm going to play it for you right now. So it's going to take just a quick second for me to set this thing up and get it to go. But I want to tell you that the story behind this, while I'm setting it up, was that they were trying to figure out how to communicate to everybody in the organization what it was that they were going to do with their strategic initiative. And so the video here is a little thing called the Seven Sisters video. I'm going to pull that up on here and play it for you. And we have this on our website. So if you look in the upper right-hand corner of the slide that is there, and again, you do get a copy of these slides after you're done with the session today, you can go replay this if you like. But I just thought it was a marvelous way of articulating this. So this cost them 250 British pounds. And here's the little video that they had that went with it. It was all a bit messy. I love that. Talk about an understatement. Now, I'm not good enough to create something clever like that. I'm going to actually show it to you again, because I find most people don't sort of get it the first time. It's very, very short, very, very quick. There's actually a little bit of music that accompanies it, but it's not critical that you hear the music portion of it at this point. So again, here's everything. Previously, information was stored all over the place. Sounds like your organization? Absolutely. Processes were duplicated. Gee, that never happens. It was all a bit messy. Wonderful British understatement, right? Now, the interesting thing about this, notice the piles that they're sorting things into. People actually remember them. People look at that and go, oh, those are the master data stacks that we're storing up. So again, if you want to take a look at that on your own, the piece is up on our website, and the URL for it is in the upper right-hand corner here of the screen, so you can see what's going on there. And again, thanks to Dave Evans for sharing that with us. He actually told me when I saw him last month that they were doing another series of these, so hopefully we'll be able to look at some other examples of this. Now that's kind of fun. It's nice. If it comes from the CEO of the organization, people tend to read it and pay attention to it, which is good, and they could learn something from it too. Here's a bit sadder of an example. Oh, now it's going to play, right? There we go. Let's get beyond that. Okay. Sad example. Here's an example where sometimes money is not the thing that is the primary reason for doing this. True story, unfortunately, we used to have to, we did GPS in all of these incidents that we had here. This was back in 2001 here, but still it's a terrible story, where we had people who were in a live fire incident doing some data management technology of using lasers and GPS systems to light up targets that they wanted to blow up. Okay, good stuff, right? Well, they're required to do it a couple times in order to do it, just to be doubly sure. Make sure that you do it. If, however, in the middle of your exercise, the batteries in your GPS go dead, the young kids that we've got out there doing this, remember they're game-playing kids, they do all sorts of things, they're really good with their Xboxes and things like that, they put in new batteries. Well, guess where the GPS points to when you put the new batteries in it? Right on your forehead. and we dropped a 2,000-pound bomb on our own troops and killed 3 Special Forces soldiers. So the reason for bringing this up is because sometimes money is not the only thing that you want to pay attention to. Sometimes life is more important than this. And I have to say that Eileen and the staff back at Data Blueprint are doing some really important work. One of the things we're trying to do right now is to reduce the number of cancer deaths that are occurring in the United States at this point, and also some very cutting-edge research in that area. But we were also very fortunate to participate in some of the suicide mitigation project work that the Army has participated in. And again, terrific people doing all kinds of really good things there. So while money is one thing that the C-levels pay attention to, in some environments, other things are important as well. I'm going to finish up the talk here with about 15 minutes talking about a series of, I put it together into one case, so this isn't an individual case, but it's representative of a case. These things, when they go to legal type things, can become very problematic for organizations. So I'm going to tell you the story of this first of all, and then I'll walk you through different aspects of how this thing worked out. So in April of the year in question, Company X, the plaintiff, requested from PeopleSoft in this case an ERP implementation specialist. And PeopleSoft responded saying that they were a preferred specialist. Now, for this particular talk here, this is a temp company who is working on a project, and they have different things. As most of you know, doing payroll is difficult enough, but if your people who you're doing payroll for get paid $5 an hour at one place, $10 an hour for 20 hours for the next week, it's a much more complicated situation than your typical payroll system. And it turns out that in this case, the PeopleSoft had a special module for doing help with temporary type activities. Think of Kelly Girls and that sort of a thing here. So, excuse me, again, in April they requested this. In July, they started work. They hired the defendant. They were going to implement the ERP. They were going to convert the legacy data. They were going to do this by December 31st, so they didn't have to roll into the next year with 2 systems running, just one system running. So they began the implementation, and on January the 9th, the defendant came to the CFO and said, we didn't get it converted. Now, that right away would have really upset me, because if I was supposed to find out by December 31st, I would have had a test date previously in there, and it turns out there was one of those in there, but they didn't tell anybody about it. So January 9th, they missed their key milestone. And when they said what happened, the defendant said, you had bad data. Now, C-level executives don't know whether that's true or not, but they're always hearing people like me yammer on about bad data, so it might very well be a good explanation for them. Nevertheless, they actually went a full year on this project, and around July, they finally stopped paying the defendant. They said, look, we can't really see what you guys are doing is providing any value here. So that's where they all ended up in court trying to figure out what happened. So let's look over what happened in the court sequence here. What we did is we provided a series of expert reports. This is very standard in business law. And our report provided evidence that the conversion code introduced errors into the data. I was sweating bullets on this one, let me tell you, because if I hadn't found an ability to show that the conversion code introduced error into the data, it would have been very difficult to defend against the charge that your system may in fact have bad data, and that may be the cause of your ERP failure. So we look at something like this. If you're going to have a conversion occur, take a sample of the data. Any sample at all is going to be better than nothing. Because if you have nothing before they start, after they touch it, it's kind of like the bull in the china shop. They get to break it, they own it. I was also able to show then through this series of forensic activities that we did at Data Blueprint that some of the data that they converted was of measurably lower quality than the data was before the conversion, so that was good too. We also were able to show that company Y caused harm because they didn't perform the requisite analysis. We would now call this a reverse engineering analysis that has to occur in there, and that analysis wasn't part of any project plan that they were using in order to do this. And finally, they caused harm by withholding specific information from the vendor. It was very, very sad type of situation here. So here's the first piece of evidence that we were able to introduce here. in this case, this is people code that PeopleSoft uses to import stuff into their environment. And PeopleSoft checks before it does anything to see if the employee exists in the database. If the employee exists, it doesn't add a second employee. It only makes sense if you're doing on primary keys. You want to make sure that you don't put duplicate primary keys out there. So PeopleSoft does terrifically. Well, these guys, when they moved it in and they didn't get the results that they wanted, they tried to move it in a second time and it didn't work. So they looked through the code and they dummied out the code that prevented them from adding duplicate fields. Again, the folks here in the room are shaking their head. That seems absolutely crazy, and if these people were working for you, you'd fire them, right? No question about it. Malfeasance is the word that has been used here. Well, let's see how bad the malfeasance was. It turned out that they were only trying to convert 6,000 customers in this case. And we ended up with 63,000 customers in the database. And we were only trying to keep track of about 10,000 employees. We had 100,000. So we had roughly 10 times the amount of data we should have had in this database. If you can imagine the analogy here, it's kind of like, you know, well, all right, if it doesn't work, let's try it again and see if it happens better the second time, right? It's an old saying that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Well, they got different results. They got 10 times the amount of data that they needed to have out there, which made it quite easy to show that the data was of lower quality. Because when I do a query for a person, I would get 10 of them. Terrible stuff, right?
No, non-feasance on the X part.
Different issue. Even in this project, the quality of the conversion data was identified at the pre-kickoff meeting as a high risk. So if we look at that and say, oh, well, that's a high risk, and yet we still allowed these bozos to go in and do this over and over and over again, it's just terrible. So again, quality of the conversion data was very high risk. Now, some of you are PMI certified that are on here. PMI certification means that you have passed and proven to people that you have amassed and mastered a body of knowledge about project management. And project management actually addresses this. When you're doing a risk assessment and a risk response, it means that if you identify the quality of the conversion data as being a high-risk item, what that means is that you will pay extra attention to it, and if things start to happen in that area, you will take additional steps to try and mitigate that risk. Now, in this case, this quote in blue there on the slide is from that, in fact, again, case here. It says, oh, the go-live date may need to be extended due to certain critical path deliverables not being met. This extension will require additional tasks and resources. The decision whether or not to extend the go-live date should be made by Monday, November 3rd. Remember, the CFO was not told until January 9th. This case, so that additional resources to get added to the task. In other words, if we do it poorly, we're going to charge you more money. And in this case, the total was almost 3,000 hours of additional time that went into this. You can see in there 1,720 and 1,120 additional hours that were going to go into this. And of course, they overran that task by a very large amount as well. Absolutely terrible way to do it. Now, one of the other things that we did here was that they was always a piece of the project where it said we're going to do this according to industry standards. So I'm letting this build up here on the screen, and I'll read it for you in a second because it's kind of like a Perry Mason case, right? So what are these industry standards you're referring to? And the answer was, well, there's nothing written or codified, but it's the standards which are recognized by consulting firms in our industry. Question. I understand what you told me a moment ago. The industry standards you're referring to are not written down anywhere. Is that correct? Answer. That's my understanding. Question. Have you made an effort to locate these industry standards and simply not been able to do so? Answer. I wouldn't know where to begin to look. Now, this is where it gets a little bit fun. The IEEE, the ACM, the ICCP, and DAMA International, my own organization, have standards that we use. And if we can't find your standards, the judges are now letting us use your standards. After all, if you say we're doing it according to standards and you can't produce standards, is it reasonable to go after somebody else's? And the answer is yes. So here's a bit from the IEEE Code of Ethics. You can see there, just I've highlighted a couple, be honest and realistic in stating claims, basing estimates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, on all of these types of things here. Or to improve consequences of understanding of technology. Here's something from the IEEE. One way to avoid unintentional harm is to carefully consider potential impacts on all those affected by decisions made during design and implementation. You can see here clearly these were not followed, and since they couldn't produce their own, we end up with a situation where we have, in this case, the defendant awarded $5 million. Now that's a lot of money, and ended up being very problematic for this particular organization because the organization was found professionally negligent. Jim here was mentioning malfeasance, right, in the room, and that's certainly the case, which meant their insurance company wouldn't cover them for this. They had to pay this one out of pocket. This is a lesson, kind of like you back your car up into a pole and cost $500, you make them pay off the $500 to hope that the kid remembers the next time that they'll be able to do this. So we spent the last last hour, sorry about that, but also the last year, going through a bunch of different topics. But today we talked specifically about why is it important to make these things concrete. And then we looked at some specific examples of this. Again, a state agency, time and leave tracking system, $10 million US annually. The ERP, $1 million. The data warehouse quality analysis, $5 billion that we were able to save. Here's a small one, 250 pounds, small investment. Or the non-monetized examples, again, sometimes saving lives is absolutely much more important than making money. And finally, the last one was Canadian, so I converted it to Canadian dollars at the time as $5,355,450 Canadian in damages and penalties for that particular organization. And with that, we're right about the top of the hour, and I'll turn it back over to Eileen and see if you guys have any questions.
Great. Thank you, Peter. That was a great presentation. Very informative. Now, like you said, it's time for our Q&A. If you out there viewing us have any questions, please type it in the chat window at the bottom of your control panel and just click send. Looks like we got a number of them coming through. The first one, Peter, is what do you think is the biggest challenge to master data management implementation? Business buy-in or IT buy-in?
So I'm going to actually pull this out and let everybody else in the room hear the question. But the question was the biggest challenge to master data management buy-in? Is that what it was, Eileen?
Yes.
Okay, so I think the biggest problem with master data management at the moment is that too many people think it's a product and treat it as such. Master data management really represents a style. If you look back at the example that I showed here, and I did label it as such, so let me just go back to that particular slide. It's a style of implementing systems. And so consequently, buying the product gets you part of the way there. And there are some products that do a very good job of helping you to manage data from a master data management perspective. On the other hand, I think that a lot of people on the call here will probably agree with the statement that master data management is just sort of, motherhood and apple pie. Are all data elements equally important? No, in fact, most of them are not. So what we're doing with master data management is we're saying some data is more important than other data.
Well, it's like metadata also. I mean, everybody misses the implication. It's the management part that's important there.
Exactly. Jim, you want to come around this side so you can actually pick up on the microphone there. Jim's comment here was that it's the management, right, not the technology piece of it. And this is where we see these things go wrong, is that when people are trying to do this, they're thinking that just buying a tool will solve the problem, whereas it's a process orientation that they need to adopt.
Or they, they run into the implementation, okay, before they've answered all of the kinds of management and control things that go around the execution and operation of the implementation.
Certainly agree with that. What else do you have, Eileen?
Let's see. Next question is, do you think that since data management professionals are word people and are interested in semantics, they get turned off by numbers and therefore have traditionally not been strong at doing the math and monetizing the problem?
What an interesting question. I mean, you can see here that the math that we're doing in these examples is very trivial, but you're right. I do see that data management people tend to be more semantically oriented. So perhaps that's a piece. I have no research to address that question, Eileen, so I certainly couldn't tell you for sure that that was, but gosh, it's an interesting thought. I should introduce my colleague Jim O'Brien, who's been working on this project here with me for the past year and a half here, so he's got a thought on it as well. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that or a misunderstanding of the environment that we work in when we talk about business sometimes. I don't know that we really always grasp how important this kind of quantification is.
I think you're right. I mean, that's one of the reasons we decided to include it as a series of seminars here. But I think also that one of the things I hear a lot is that people say, this is the right thing to do, and I apologize for everybody on this for pounding on the table here, but that's exactly what I was doing, and that's exactly the way this comes across to an awful lot of people, is that they go, this is the right thing to do. We agree with you, it's the right thing to do, but on the other hand, we're making money, a lot of these corporations are, so they don't tend to have this as part of their thinking. And again, I think this has actually been this is one of my most popular talks in the last year, right, Eileen, in terms of doing the monetizing?
Yeah, this one's very popular.
I think we must have done it about 12 times or so.
Yes.
In order to do that.
Something like that, yeah. It's very, very popular and very very in demand.
So hopefully we're getting through and getting some folks to pay attention to this. All right, what's our next question?
The next question relates back to a slide where you showed the percentage of successful data management in organizations over a 26-year period from 1982 to 2007. Where was that?
Got it right here.
Okay, so the question is, the trend line in there, maybe not that one. Yeah. The trend line is very troubling. The number of unsuccessful keeps increasing and the number of successful keeps decreasing. Do you have any updates on this development?
Yeah, I wish I did. No, I have no data beyond this 2007 survey that we did out there. It's clearly time to go out and do it again, and that's where I'll be able to get my good doctoral students and my colleagues in the DAMA community. Although I have to admit, in those of us that are members of DAMA, these numbers are considerably different.
Well, I mean, I would point out that it's a long time period, and things have changed over that time period.
1981, we had 1, 2, 3 databases, period.
Yeah, and I mean, if the database got up and data got in it and the program didn't crash, we tend to look at that as being a success. And I think today, our requirements for success, our criteria is a lot more stringent. But you also have to wonder, is there a performance issue here? Are we really doing a better job or a worse job or whatever? In fact, I found this slide very interesting, and I had a question for you on this slide. Has anybody done any work on correlating this with, you showed another slide where, I think it was a previous slide, or no, slide 19. Okay, one more. With these categorizations. In other words, have we been able to show where if we do data management first, are we more likely to have successful outcomes?
These are subjective, of course, results, but in fact, I do have a doctoral student working on that exact question right there. So yes, it's a good, obvious one, and we have exactly that type of question going on in there. But more important to your point, it's a huge gap between 1981 and 2007. And for us not to have looked at it, the number of studies that have been done in software are astoundingly high. If you look at the ACM keywords, just the keywords that are used to organize the taxonomy of research in here, there are 96% of them focused on software and 4% focused on data. So it's been a neglected area, and I think that's the main thing I would like you all to take away from this, is that we really do have to do a lot more to find out what it is we're knowing and doing in our profession. Again, is the question that they've gone from being successful to unsuccessful because they really have been, or is our standards changed and we now know that we need to be doing more in order to actually come up with this? I mean, think about it. In the old days, if we loaded the database with the wrong data by doing a reload or something like that, that was a horrible thing. We don't tend to do that very often. Your bank doesn't tend to come along and go, oh, Jim, here's last month's balance. That's good enough, right? We have gotten good at some areas. So I think there's some improvement here. I say that. You're off, going to head off to the Hackers Conference, right?
No, I'm laughing because that is actually a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And that's actually a situation I found myself in.
Got it.
You know, fortunately, when you did that back in those days, things went boom very, very quickly.
Very quickly.
You know, today we've got things that they're so tightly integrated and coupled, and things are so complex. That's not necessarily the case anymore.
We got a different set of challenges.
You know, I mean, you can make a mistake like that and have it go for, you know, hours, minutes, days, weeks, whatnot, and causing cascading corruption.
Get all the way to Mars.
And I'll save this conversation for when we're talking about data quality. You know.
Let's see, when's that going to be, Eileen? We had data quality back next September, I think, if I recall correctly.
But it does kind of raise a point because, I mean, this really is one of the biggest areas where you can save an organization money, okay, but how do you quantify a catastrophe that hasn't occurred and won't occur because you did things the right way?
It gets to the point where I hear a lot of people saying Y2K was a waste of money.
No, Y2K was an astounding success.
Absolutely, and we needed to do it. If we hadn't, bad things would have happened. It just flourished me that level of ignorance is out there, and yet people still believe that Y2K was a waste of money. If we hadn't fixed that, we'd all be still recovering from it now.
But, I mean, the reason they believe that is because we can't put a dollar figure
on what might have happened.
On what might have happened.
Exactly.
And this is a constant problem when it comes to justifying these kinds of activities to C-level folks.
Precisely. All right, Eileen, what's our next question?
The next question is, where do you see bad data management starting normally, in design, in implementation, or somewhere else completely?
I go back to requirements on that one. When I see this, the reason I got into this business many, many moons ago was because, to me, if you express your requirements as a data model, they are the most objective and quantifiable form of requirements that exist. Tell me what a friendly user interface is. I don't think we can do that, right? But if you tell me something's got a one-to-many relationship in there, I can double-check that. So I always go back to requirements on that. I think that's really the problem. If you look at this, maybe let's take a quick side detour here, because I do have a slide that addresses that. Because Jim and I have been working on ways of articulating some of that here, and maybe some of this will be useful for folks. So as long as we're in the Q&A piece, I don't think anybody will mind if I go a little bit sideways on this. But you know, what has tended to happen is that people just think that data is something that happens magically. And you know, we can wait till we get to the very end of the project and we can go to the database people and they'll just build a database and get some stuff for us to look at. So I'm going to pull up a little chart for the way we articulate this. This is something that actually was developed here. Give me a quick second to pull it up. But if we can't get this message to the right folks, it's going to be a problem, because if you don't know what it is you're trying to attempt to tell them, you know, in that there's a problem with whatever it is, it's going to be very, very, very difficult to really show how people are able to quantify these things. So again, give me just a quick second here. I'll show you this one little articulation that we've been trying to work up. And Jim, I know you've seen versions of this one here too, but it's for everybody else who's watching. So I apologize for the slowness on this. And there are my wonderful triangle charts. There we go. if I talk about the way things tend to be done. Yeah, that doesn't come up there. Okay, so we'll just put it on this one. Slide only, there we go. So a little bit hard to read there, but I think it's definitely readable. If you look, organizations start out with strategy. They make goals and objectives to implement that strategy, and those goals and objectives are then implemented in a series of systems and applications. We then develop some network infrastructure, and data is always the last thing that they think about. The way we'd like to see it happen, and the way it should be done, is that strategy, goals, and objectives drive data and information needs that then determine what your network and infrastructure components do, and then and only then should you look at systems and applications that go within it. And this is the difference between application-centric and data-centric development philosophies. We're trying as hard as we can to do this. If anybody has any thoughts on these articulations, we'd love to hear it, because these are, again, as Jim mentioned, kind of relatively new ideas that we're trying to put out there, just the same way as quantifying these things or putting dollar costs on them is relatively new. It's new thinking, and that's good. It means we're going to have some really good folks in here. I want to make sure I do this too. The fellow that created this is a guy named Doug Bagley, and we appreciate his contributions there. It's been very, very nice. And I think we're ready for the next question. I'm sorry about the deviation, but hopefully that was useful.
Okay, let's see. The next one is a little bit longer too. Any advice on how to Okay, let me start over. Any advice on how best to prioritize various different data management disciplines? For example, data definition, data quality, master data management, metadata. I'm guessing the answer is based upon the business priority, highest monetary benefit across all of the disciplines for one subject area.
Yeah, although I hate to give you a consultant's answer if it depends, but really, if your organization has just experienced a catastrophic failure, you're going to have a different set of priorities than an organization that's actually in a different set of categories and doing something completely differently. So it is going to be specific to your organization. That said, our articulation here that we have on this data management body of knowledge clearly shows that governance is the central part. If you don't have governance, anything else out there is just the wild, wild west. So I would always start off with a component that says, let's get some buy-in, and let's make sure that some folks are paying attention to this in the organization and trying to implement some of these pieces well, as opposed to trying to do everything all at once, which we certainly have seen organizations try to do. How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time, right? Not everybody chewing on it all the way around.
Right, but the trick is to take the bites in the right sequence. You know, and sequence is important. I really do think that there are inherent dependencies between these different areas.
So that might be an interesting.
And that is, you know, in fact, that nice lady in, I believe, in South Africa, Sue. You know, 3-4 months ago, I told her I would take a look at this. And, you know,
hey, that's your talk for Dama next year, right?
Yeah,
You've already got one in this year.
I've already got one, but no, I take a look at this and try and pull some thoughts together as to what those interdependencies are. That won't happen until February or later. So, sorry guys, but I got to make a living too.
We all do. Thanks, Jim. So I'm not sure that was a whole lot of help, but again, if I had to go second steps, data governance first, I think your architecture is going to be the next piece that you really need to work on. If you don't understand your architecture, the rest of it's going to be problematic, right?
Well, you know, I mean, we've got time. Ask Eileen how many questions we have outstanding, because we could talk about this for a long time.
We'll actually get cut off. We'll lose our time before we do that. All right, Eileen, other questions?
Let's see. Where is master data management best located, with designers, implementers, or operating people?
All three?
Yeah. If you do one and leave the other two out, you have a three-legged stool that's trying to stand on two legs or one leg even.
All three have got different roles to play in that function. Remember, it's management. Okay, it's the functions that we wrap around this that are important. Okay, and there are going to be operational activities, there are going to be design activities, there are going to be analytical activities that have to take place. And like you said, that's a great metaphor. If you miss one, you're going to have an unbalanced stool.
If we took that out of context, that could get us in a lot of trouble, right?
Her
No.
chat box? No, okay.
All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Either that, or we can spend
pontificate on this.
15 minutes talking about exactly this. I don't know.
Actually, I think it'd be. I mean, again, one of the things we want you guys to do is to absolutely think of these types of contributions, because you can see it is a new and exciting discipline, and Jim and I get excited about talking about these things, and we probably have talks let out for the next 5 years if we kept at it, right?
Right, but I mean, if I was arranging these pie slices, that probably would show data governance as kind of like off to the side, a pillar, because no matter what kind of precedence takes place between these pie slices, data governance, I think, should always play a role. I mean, if nothing else, data governance should be telling us what it is that these pie slices are to produce, and what kind of form that they should take.
I think so. All right, everybody. Well, again, thanks. We'll look forward to seeing you in the new year. I guess we do have one thing we want to say, which is that we're changing the time on this next year to 2 p.m. East Coast time. So let me make sure I put that slide up. And we'll start back up at the top of the wheel here with our data governance talk on this one. Boy, this was a long talk. We had a lot of slides. There we go. Next one. So January 10th, 2012 at 2 p.m. East time. And we'll post the entire schedule up very, very soon. And again, thanks to the folks at Dataversity for hosting us on this. And Jim, thanks for your comments. Very, very helpful. Bye, everybody.